First of all, welcome. I'm Sarah Marshank, and I'm the founder of Self-History. And we're going to explore the topic of making good decisions or making decisions that align. And I'm going to take you on a little journey in order to explore or explain how we do decision making the Self-History way. And I'm going to create for you a different way of perceiving it or a different perspective on decision making, and then give you a few tools and techniques to kind of play with it. I'm going to ask that if you have any questions as we go, that you type them in the chat, and I will answer all of those at the end rather than breaking the flow of my talk. And yeah, and if there's any questions I don't get to, or you have any follow-up questions, those of you who know me know that I am very available and accessible. That's part of what Self-History's main vision and mission is to cultivate and create relationships and connections that actually support one another in being better humans in these very interesting times. So looks like everybody is settled in. We're recording. So I'm just going to dive right in. So the first thing I want to do is just say a bit about why I chose this topic. And the reason is because over the years of sharing this work through my own self-inquiry and my own self-discovery and talking to people about what they experienced after learning some of these tools and techniques, a lot of what came back to me was, wow, Sarah, I accept myself more fully and I trust myself. And I thought about that for a long time, that whole trust thing, like, why do people not trust themselves? And that was really connected to making decisions, to trust that we're making decisions that are really ours, to trust that we're making the right ones, that we have the capacity to source that knowing from inside of ourselves. It's really, really a complex endeavor. So that's why I chose this topic. It addresses very directly some of the benefits of what Self-History can offer. So the first thing I want to say about making decisions and the challenge with making decisions is there's nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. It is not an easy thing to make clear decisions. Most of us and most people out there who you may look at and tell a story that they're making decisions so easily or so seamlessly, most people are just running on a certain autopilot, making decisions based upon how they've always done it, or how they think they should do it, or how somebody expects them to do it. So if you can relate to that, you can just kind of raise your internal hand. You may even be able to raise a hand on this Zoom software. Yeah, there they go. Cool. Yeah, right? Can you relate to that? So the truth is that it is a complex maneuver to make decisions that are aligned with some core sense of self. Okay, so how come it's so complex? Well, and I know I have a neuroscientist out there. I'm going to make a statement that I Googled. And the statement is, let me just get the exact number, because it was kind of startling to me here in my notes, that the brain has 100 trillion neural connections. 100 trillion, right? So those are the possibilities that can happen in our brain in making a decision. 100 trillion. That's ridiculous. Of course, it's a complex process. So what neuroscience is showing us, which is very compelling, and I hope that you can really just take this in, is that this notion of a self, a coherent self, Sarah, me, is basically, from a neuroscientific perspective, an illusion. We kind of take all, somehow mysteriously, we take all these neural pathways and these connections, and they happen so fast and they overlap and intertwine that we're left with a sense of coherence that is not a given. And so we weave a story around, because we have this innate sense of me or I, that I'm a self making decisions, when in fact, decisions are happening not necessarily under your control. So that's the first thing. We have very complex systems that have multiple possibilities in any moment of any direction, numerous directions, maybe even infinite directions we can go. So that should help you relax. The second thing is, look at the times that we live in. Okay, this is another raise your hand moment. How many of you walk into a grocery store to buy, let's say, a box of cereal for your kids, or me the other day for my granddaughter, and you walk in there and there's, okay, maybe not 100 trillion choices, but there's a lot. There's hundreds in one supermarket aisle of cereal. So there's this internal complexity and infinite possibilities. Add to that external complexities and possibilities. And okay, so you see, it's kind of a big deal to make the quote unquote right one. Okay, so that's number one. There's nothing wrong with you because you have a challenge making decisions. And number two, it's a complex process. And what we're going to do here is unpack it a little bit to find a way to make it more easy and more satisfying and fun. So here's the next step. What I'm going to invite you to do is to imagine that every possibility in a decision that you're going to make comes from a different self inside of you. So let me say that another way. Let's give each desire, I'm just going to track my notes here as I go. Let's give each desire or preference or thought a unique identity and call it a self. So each neural pathway we could say is a self. So let me give you an example, a personal example. See if you can relate to this. There's a Sarah inside who would love to get her PhD. There's a Sarah inside who would love to buy a cabin in the woods and go live there alone. There's a Sarah inside who has social anxiety and doesn't want to go to parties, gets uncomfortable around gatherings and parties. And there's a Sarah inside who is longing for community and connection and celebration. Those are just 4 of the Sarahs that live inside of this complex organism. And as you can see, the desires are not necessarily in the same direction. They're oppositional on some level. So I'm going to invite you in this exploration to play with the possibility that it's okay to let go of your sense of selfhood as one self and view yourself as 100 trillion selves, okay? And let all those selves be welcomed and let all those selves be present. So that's the first reorientation that I'd like you to consider as we explore decision making. Here I am, a billion Sarahs, a trillion Sarahs, 100 trillion Sarahs. That's the first step. Presence them all, let them all be here. Don't make any of them wrong. Don't marginalize them. And don't be surprised if other ones start coming forward as you make room for them. Okay, second step is we're going to take one of those selves and we're going to focus on that one. And we're going to focus on the one self that is interested, capable, and curious about all the other 100 trillion selves. This self, we're going to call the witness self. And the reason we're going to call that the witness self is because it is the one that is really capable and desirous of just holding space for all the other 100 trillion. Now, this self is the same self that gets cultivated through many Eastern meditative practices, and throughout history has been of high value in meditative lineages in order to kind of get distance from all the 100 trillion other selves. In Buddhist tradition, those 100 trillion selves are called desires. And the root of suffering in the Buddhist teaching is desire. So what the witness self does, it makes space for those 100 trillion selves to just be for the moment. We'll get back to them, trust me. And to just rest in the possibility that you don't have to identify as any of those, that essentially you're not any of those. And that this witness self has the capacity, I call it the secret sauce in self-mastery, because it's so profound once we really can rest in this one, that this one is capable of integrating, of guiding, of synthesizing, of presencing, of loving all the other 100 trillion cells. That's its job, okay? So number one is presence the 100 trillion cells. And number two is to grow and cultivate this one self that we're calling the witness self. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say. Oh, this self is totally non-judgmental. It's really important. This self looks at all the other ones and does not have a preference for any of them, that this whole system of Sarah, right? We're going to call this the complex system of Sarah, that how she moves into life, this witness self does not have any preferences. It also does not have any judgments about the 100 trillion selves, like that any of them are losers, or any of them are scaredy cats, or any of them are ridiculous, or any of them are great, or any of them are so cool. It doesn't have any of those judgments. It really is a neutral ground, which is quite a magical and profound place to actually rest in. So, second step is to cultivate this witness self inside of you. Now, from this ground of the witness, we can then have the possibility to orient all the other selves and their different desires and make a choice. Okay, let's use just a simple example of you're making a choice about which ice cream to have for dessert, one of my favorite foods. And there's a self who likes chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and mint chip. That's about my range of major preferences. So when I rest as the witness, I see all those desires. Excuse me. I see them as, I just see them. They all are legitimate possibilities, right? But I'm not attached to any of them. And I don't have a preference for which one the system of Sarah has for dessert. But as the witness self, I have the capacity to choose. So here's the most important question, my friends. Where does that self, what I'm calling that witness self, you might give it another name, okay? The most important thing is for you to embody it and experience it. From where does that self make its decision, right? What's the word I'm looking for? Like from what ground of moral or ethical standards, from what ground of what's best or worst for the system. Like it has to have some fundamental ground from which to choose. Otherwise it would be totally random. And we're not talking about a randomness here. We're talking about decisions that align with your core sense of self, that bring you joy, that bring you contentment, that bring you trust in yourself. So that witness has to have a place that it leans into for stability in order to choose and guide those 100 trillion selves into a coherent movement into life. I suggest to you that that ground is infinite possibility. That ground is the universe. That ground is the cosmos. That ground is pure energy for those of you who are scientifically bent. For those of you who are theologically bent, that ground is God, the creator, or the source, or the mystery, or the Great Spirit, or the Ein Sof. There's many names for it. But here's something that's really important. In order for this to work, you have to have your own genuine connection to this ground, because the minute you decide that this ground has a right or wrong or has an agenda for you, you are no longer in this ground. You are in one of the 100 trillion cells who has a story about this ground. So just take that in for a moment. This ground is fundamentally free and unconditionally loving. It doesn't give a hoot about which way you go or what you do. There's no right or wrong. It's just the infinite expression and possibility of form or of expression that happens to have taken its seat as you, right? You, the unique new, the unique Sarah, right? Which is seriously the most mysterious and magical and awesome thing that is from our perspective. So here we have the 100 trillion selves. We have the witnesses like the bridge, okay? Or the vehicle within which that this fundamental ground of being can have expression. Now, the fundamental ground of being doesn't care whether I eat chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, mint chocolate chip. It really doesn't. And if you're functioning under story that it does, like it has to be kosher in order for you to connect to source, or it has to be, I don't know. There's so many different stories about it. You know what yours are. Trust me, this one has no story. This one has no agenda. And that can be scary for many of the 100 trillion cells. But it's not scary for this one. It's not scary for this one. This one knows that its joy and its peace rests in just being an expression of that fundamental ground. Its joy and its trust and its awe is not dependent on what we do out in the world. This is the piece that many of us were never taught and never cultivated. We've been taught to be a certain of the 100 trillion selves or conglomeration of them, and we've been seeking to get our joy and our peace and our success and our fulfillment out here without learning how to rest here. So what's next? What's next is the integration of all three of these realms. And it's artistry, and it's a dance, and it's a process. And the joy is in the journey of mastery, but there is no perfecting this, my friends, because this is an evolving and emergent system, this mystery of life. So what do? What do we do? The first thing we do, we consider the paradigm or the perspective or the map that we have 100 trillion selves, and we give them all the opportunity to be here, from vanilla to chocolate to strawberry to mint chocolate chip to every other, right? How many ice cream flavors are there? More than cereal boxes. And we allow them. Then we cultivate this witness sense. And you might, you might end up feeling like, oh, that's the soul. I know that part of myself. But again, the qualities of this part of yourself are they're non-judgmental and very aware of all the other selves. So you cultivate that. Then you learn to rest and trust in this fundamental ground of being that has no right or wrong. I promise you. Okay? And then you begin with the witness as kind of the choreographer. Sometimes I call that one the bus driver or the choreographer or the conductor. And what she does or he does or they do is they consider the 100 trillion selves. They don't bypass them. They don't stuff them under the rug. They don't make them wrong. They consider them. And then they make a decision and a choice that is grounded in no right or wrong and aligned with the true capacity and the true magnificence of your unique 100 trillion selves, right? Because yours are unique. And you have a history and a DNA and a story and an ancestry that determines the specific selves you have in your system, on your bus, right? And those are unique to you. And there are unique desires and preferences. And as we said, many of them are contradictory. So what this witness self does is it provides, it's like the adult in the room, right? That it really loves all of them and considers all of them and takes them into consideration, but makes a choice for the whole team and moves forward. That's the alignment, the trustworthiness that we're longing for. So that process is the kind of messy and beautiful and creative process of self-authorship, of self-alignment, of authenticity. And it breeds a fundamental sense of trust and joy and okayness with who you are and how you're being in the world. And at the same time, opens up possibility for more or better or different. So here's a few clues and secrets, and then we'll take some questions. The first one is that presencing all of these selves takes time and attention, but it's not hard. Similarly, cultivating this witness center, I call it my center. This witness center takes time and attention. It's probably the most dormant in all of us. Right? So to actually cultivate that takes time and attention, but it's not hard. Meditation is not hard if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it. There's going to be resistance. Hey, listen, if you've got some selves that have been running the show, they're not necessarily going to trust this new one coming on board. But over time, they will. And not only will they trust it, but they will long to listen for it. And they will want it to guide your life. When you make a decision, it's important to stick with it. As you practice and make a decision from this witness self, it's important to just stick with it and not second guess yourself. Because what has a tendency to happen is, let's say I get really quiet and I listen and the answer is chocolate. So I say to the whole gang, okay, we're going to have chocolate. The one who wanted vanilla and the one who wanted strawberry and the one who wanted mint chocolate chip are going to revolt, right? Of course, naturally. Over time, they won't. Over time, they will learn that the next time we have the opportunity to have ice cream, there's a good possibility we'll get vanilla or strawberry or mint chocolate chip. And not only that, they actually learn to enjoy the other flavors. This takes time. It's an integrative process, okay? So the important thing while you're learning and practicing this is don't be too hard on yourself. Make a decision, listen as deeply as you can, trust it, and then when the other voices come up, just say, thank you for sharing. Chocolate. And what that allows you to do is to really experience the awesomeness of the chocolate. Because you're not sitting there eating a bite of chocolate saying, oh, I wish it was vanilla, or oh, I made the wrong decision. Oh, how could I have? And you're missing the magnificence of chocolate, okay? And then the last secret is, it's important, and I'm gonna give you an example of this because it really deserves a full example. It's important to not, to give the vanilla lover an opportunity to just cry for a moment. Right? Now, I know what I just said is a little bit contradictory to that, but here's an example. And some of you know the story. After years of being in retreat, where I really focus on cultivating this witness self, this one that was detached from all the other selves, and I actually thought I was going to stay there because it's a really peaceful place. You know, those of you who have accessed it know I was just working with a woman the other day who was finally able, through some guided visualization, to just rest there for a moment. And when I asked her what it was like, she said it was such a relief, right? It was such a relief. And so over years of cultivating that sense of relief, there often wasn't a real interest in going out and manifesting any of those desires or giving any of those other selves an opportunity to experience life. But that wasn't the whole story. And the whole story was giving those selves an opportunity to be a part of this life in a way that was integrated and whole and honoring of my human uniqueness and this unique life and its limitations and its mortality. And so when I came back into life, I had the opportunity I met my husband, and the opportunity was to whether or not I wanted to have a child. And this is a big decision, right? You guys, this is not chocolate, but this isn't ice cream or cereal. It's a big one. And most of the big ones, and for many of us, it's about relationship, it's about our careers, it's about children, it's about our aging process. It's choices and decisions that really have a long-term impact for this one human life. And so the decision to whether or not to have a child came up, and my now husband said to me that he was not going to be having any children, and that if I wanted any more children, he had to. And if I wanted a child, it wouldn't be with him. And so here I was at a real crossroads, right? And I had to make a decision for myself, not for him. And this is key. We make decisions for others that we then resent and regret, instead of going through this process to make a decision for ourselves that is really true for us, that we can live with. So I had to go into myself and do this exact process I'm sharing with you, listening to all of the Sarahs, and they were both sided. There were Sarahs that wanted it more than anything and longed for it her whole life and couldn't imagine a life without bearing a child. And then there were the Sarahs that had really very little to no interest in having a child, that this life was about her own spiritual evolution and her own creativity, and a child would be a burden, and a child would be a chore, and a child would be a lot of work. And in between those two extremes were a bunch of other Sarahs that, kind of could go either way. So how does one decide with a sense of peace? And this is how. To go in to that calm place and to rest in knowing absolutely that I couldn't get it wrong. That having a child or not having a child, there was not a right or a wrong way to go. That I wasn't going to get in trouble, that I wasn't going to go to hell, that I wasn't going to ruin my life. No matter which choice I made, they were both good choices. The only thing that I needed to worry about was making the one that was right for me. And this process of getting very quiet and allowing all of those selves to chime in and give their 2 cents, and resting in the silence and the stillness and listening. And the listening takes into account all of the selves and the no self. And the answer that came through was no. You're not going to have children in this life. And that decision was clear. It rung like a bell, and it rung in the silence of my sitting, not in the noise of everybody arguing over what they wanted, because they all made sense and they all could be right. The no came from this deep place. And from this deep place, I felt confident and at peace with moving this whole system forward. And I didn't second guess it. So that's the first clue I told you, right? It's important not to second guess it. But here's the other piece. I also had to allow these other selves that really wanted one to grieve. And what that meant was that Sarah, I had to go through a grieving process, because we're all in here, right? So I allowed those parts of myself those selves as they integrate to grieve. And I went through a grieving process and did a ritual and did some therapy. Like, therapy is great for this kind of stuff. But here's the thing about therapy. When I go into therapy or work with a healer, I go in as the witness self with another one of myself to deepen that relationship. I don't go to fix any one of myself or to change them or to empower them or strengthen them. I go in as my center, as my witness self, as my core self, whatever you decide to call that one, and work to develop a loving and trusting relationship with all my other selves. So there was a grieving process, but there was never a regret. And in that regard, I have celebrated the beauty of having a child-free life, right? So it's important to honor our humanity. It's important to honor that we have multiple voices. We have multiple desires. And I could not have a child and not have a child at the same time in this life. It's true, I can have chocolate and vanilla at different times, and that's a little bit easier of a decision to make. And one could argue, well, I didn't have children for the first 40 some odd years of my life, so I could have had a child for the second 40 some odd years of my life and had both of those experiences. But I could not have a life without children and a life with children as Sarah Marshank, this integrated system of selfhood. So there you have it, right? There you have a system and a way and a map and an orientation that allows you a way to love yourself as you are without needing to fix or change anything, to ground into a center that is really not attached and really available to love and include all of you just as you are, and a fundamental ground and presence that is holding your worth and is holding you, loving you unconditionally and saying it's safe. It's safe for you to be you. It's safe to take a chance. It's safe to grieve. It's safe to be unhappy. It's safe to make choices that eliminate other ones, because what you do is not what will bring you joy. It'll bring you happiness. It'll bring you experiences. It'll bring you sensations. And we all love those. We're human beings. But it won't bring you that sense of peace and that sense of contentment and that sense of autonomy and sovereignty and trust that resting and living from this center will. And this is accessible to us. It's not that far away. So the practice, so we have a question coming in now, and I had another one come in via email. So let's take a couple questions. Sheila, hi, is asking, what if your witness self doesn't know the answer? And that's a really important question. And the answer is that it will. It just needs more time. It needs more time. I didn't sit down for 5 minutes and get the answer about no for children. I took a week to be in the stillness and be in the listening, right? I took a week, and that was after 10 years of a lot of meditation practice that really cultivated that I have a sense. So the big questions will often take a little more time because there's a lot of sorting. But play with the little ones and learn to trust that voice. Learn, that's the still small voice. That's the deep intuition. That's the whisper from your soul, right? The confusion is when one of the selves up here pretends they're this one. And we all get duped, right? Because we have really strong selves up here that want to get it right, that want to be loved. And look at the culture we live in. Those selves are being bombarded all the time with the message you're not good enough. And you need to be stronger and prettier and smarter and wealthier and more powerful to be loved, and you need to follow all these rules if you want to go to heaven, and you're a loser if you, all of the messages we're getting up here, and they will dupe you. You know, they will pretend they're the voice of the witness when they just, you know, are wanting to get their desires met. And the thing, Sheila, to remember is that's okay. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. This is a skill that takes practice, like any skill, to get good at. And what I find is that people are afraid to cultivate this skill. They want something easy or quick, and it's just not easy or quick. But over time, once this is developed, it's much more fluid and graceful and elegant and fun. Initially, it's a little bit of work. It's like, you know, you got an atrophied muscle and you go to the gym. Initially, it's going to take a little bit of effort to get that muscle working again. But here's the thing. If this resonates with you at all, right? If you trust the philosophy behind it, if you trust the paradigm, if you trust where I'm coming from with this presentation, just like if you trust your trainer, right, who has a deep knowledge of your whole body, right, and how your body works and the whole musculoskeletal system, then you're more willing to do the exercises. Right? You're more willing to trust. And especially if you look at your trainer and you admire your trainer and how they are in their body. So I invite you to consider exploring and examining and discussing, right, with me, this paradigm, this model, this view, this point of view, so that you can know for yourself, right, if you can trust the system to work for you. And I know it's kind of a catch-22 because I'm going to tell you to do this to know if you can trust it, but how can you do this if you don't know how to do this? So I'm going to invite you in. I'm going to invite you in to explore with me, to have conversations with me. I am going to be teaching a 7-week course starting next week online. So it's an online course. It's a 7-week journey where we'll be doing this together. It's a small group. It'll be a small cohort. And we'll be able to have conversations about this. And we'll be able to, I'll give you tools and techniques to presence the selves, to cultivate the witness, and to rest into source. Okay. I saw another question come in, so I got a little distracted. This course is a great way for you to discover if this is right for you. I'm also available to have private conversations with you. Just email me and say, Sarah, I gotta ask you something, or I'm wondering about this. I'm very available for that, and I understand the importance of it, because this is about your life and about doing your life well. And unless you're, you know, a life hacker, from where I sit, our lives are impermanent, and at some point we are gonna die, and we are mortal. And the question of how to live our life to the fullest while we're here is, I know, something that's alive for each and every one of you. And so if this system resonates, if this point of view resonates, if my story resonates, then come play and give it a shot. 7-week course is a great way to dive in, to get support, to be able to get some personal attention on where you're going to bump up against yourselves, and so that I can help you in orienting them and finding your own artistry. I have a question about therapy, right? That I said that therapy isn't about fixing, it's about cultivating a relationship between the witness self and any one or multiple selves inside of the system of you. And Adele is asking for more explanation on that. And I'm gonna flag that, right? Because that was a really beautiful point. I'm gonna flag that for the course and take that into the course. And we'll really dive into, and for each one of you, different kinds of therapies will work for different selves that tend to be a little bit out of control, or they're like bullies, right? So the witness has to contend with them, right? And this bully will try to shut up all the other ones. So there has to be, in this artistry, some sort of way for the witness self to convince the bully self that it's safe to relax and listen to it for what its underlying longing is. Okay? So that's about 41 minutes. And let me just see what the question was that came in online before. This is a good one just to end with. And one was, is there any other way to grow the witness besides meditating? Right? For some reason, there's a lot of resistance around meditating. And I can relate because I had it as well. And the answer is maybe, but I haven't found it yet. So first off is to really consider this whole point of view that I've sketched out for you today and see if it resonates. Okay. And then if you're convinced, right, then you will go to the gym and at least give this a shot for a little while. Give me 3 months, right? Give me 7 weeks to just see if things start to light up inside of you, right? If this deep intuitive yes starts to grow, and you'll know and you'll begin to trust it. And it's not that far away. Okay. It really is a lot about reorienting yourself to the whole system of you, and then finding these little tools and methods and daily practices and lifestyles that support you to be aligned with yourself, aligned with your God, your source, and fully embodying your human uniqueness and its superpowers and its limitations, so that you on your deathbed can say, probably there will be selves that won't want to go, and there will be selves that are ready to go. But the integrated whole you will be able to say, it was a good ride. We did good. And that is my wish for you. And that is my hope for you. And that is my mission or my determination to share with you a way to fulfill that, a way that works for me and many other people, and that would discover this isn't a system that I learned and am now teaching. This is something that emerged from inside of me, and I trust unequivocally. So if you have a resonance, come play with me. I'd love to know you more. Again, there's people on this call that I have never met. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. And I look forward to hearing from you. Okay? All right. Blessings to all of you. See you soon.